What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're going to jump in and talk about weapons inside of update 2.1.4. So of course we saw a pretty big update this week, and it's affected a lot of Sandbox stuff in the game, but specifically in this video, we're going to talk about weapons that are worth trying out in this new Sandbox. We'll touch on some PvP weapons, what's changed in the Crucible, but also some really juicy PvE weapons. There are a few pretty insane buffs inside of PvE as well, so if you're wondering what's going on with weapons inside of this update, then we'll do our best to round it up in this video guys. As always, if you enjoy this one, a rating is very much appreciated below, but without further delay, let's get straight into it. So we're going to speak about PvE and PvP stuff inside of this video guys. Of course, auto rifles, scout rifles, snipers, as well as a couple of exotics in particular saw some changes, but we also have the introduction of the last word into the game, so we'll talk about that briefly in a moment as well. Let's actually start out by talking about auto rifles though. First up, let's speak about Soros Regime. So a few people have mentioned this one since the update dropped, and generally I think folks are enjoying how it feels, especially in PvP. So the buff does affect both rates of fire on the Soros Regime. There hasn't been a major time to kill change for the weapon, although there is a damage change. So previously you'd see 34 per crit, and now we see 36 per crit. On the whole, it's a reliability change that allows you to hit more kills on high resilience players, and I believe as well you can miss another crit for a body shot on low resilience players. So basically, it's a little more reliable, especially using dual speed receiver. Spinning up hasn't seen as much of a damage change, so you'll probably notice a bigger difference with dual speed receiver in general. I mean, otherwise, it still feels like Soros Regime, still very much a medium range weapon in general, but one that you might see just a little bit more success with in PvP, and of course, this buff affects PvE content as well. You do have weapons like Cerberus +1 as well as Sweet Business, both of these affected by the high impact frame buff, so they've got a 5% damage increase in general. Of course, this will affect your legendaries, things like the age-old Bond, so they are a little bit better than they were before. One of the bigger buffs would be for rapid fire frame auto rifles, so things like Valakaden or the Misfit from Forsaken, and these now have one of the best times to kill inside of PvP for auto rifles, so if you're holding on to any well-rolled rapid fire frame autos, definitely it's worth trying them out. Now before we talk about any more general archetype changes, let's jump to PvE content, especially on the exotic front. One weapon which is really exciting would be Legend of Acrius. So they have increased damage and range. The range boost is by around about 0.5 meters, so it's not absolutely huge. However, the PvE damage has been increased by 50%, which is absolutely huge. Stormtester on Reddit posted some basic damage numbers. So in an instance, with one shot, threat level would do 2,649 damage, and Legend of Acrius will do 11,506 damage. So that kind of puts it into perspective versus some of the legendary shotguns. And as you can see on Dull and Karud right here, we get 197,880 damage, as well as 7 lots of 22,500 damage. So yeah, safe to say, Legend of Acrius is pretty nasty right now. And the other thing I should mention is that I've done all of this without things like Empowering Rift. I can imagine in Gambit, if you get maybe 2 or 3 players with the Legend of Acrius on a team, drop down an Empowering Rift with Melting Point. Honestly, I could see Legend of Acrius being really, really nasty, so definitely don't sleep on this weapon. And if it's one that you haven't picked up yet, absolutely I'd recommend trying to go back, clear that Year 1 Leviathan raid, which is where you actually get the weapon, especially now that it's doing so nicely in terms of damage. Another interesting change though would of course be for Telesto, everyone's favourite Crucible weapon. So inside of PvP it now does 39 blast damage, and previously it was 49, so that will require 5 bolts instead of 4 to get a kill inside of PvP, which is a fairly significant nerf. So it's absolutely going to be a much less reliable weapon inside of PvP content. However, in PvE, there was a buff to compensate, and Telesto is now actually really solid in that special slot, especially considering we have things like Jotun, which can do some really good damage when you consider how good it also is in PvP. I'd say Telesto is, in a pretty similar spot. So there is a noticeable buff to damage inside of PvE content, which I think is absolutely fantastic, and it also means that Telesto, especially with certain modifiers, is going to still be a pretty appealing weapon. You may also notice the zoom has been increased a little bit on Telesto, so they bumped the optic stat from 15 to 20. Obviously that in general is more obnoxious in PvP content, but in terms of the damage buff, it has seen a 30% increase in its base damage inside of PvE. So for that content specifically, it has not only survived the nerf, but it's actually a little bit better in PvE than it was previously. Now, let's not ignore the new kid on the block, or should I say the new last word. The last word, of course, has returned to the game, and outside of the grueling quest to pick it up, in general, it does have quite a bit more range than it had in D1, less stability, especially when ADS'd, very high recoil when aiming down sights, and it also does have slightly sluggish handling versus Destiny 1, but if you hit all headshots, of course, it has a very quick time to kill at 0.53, and you can also kill in 4 body shots, so in terms of time to kill in general, it's pretty good. On console though, aiming down sights shots at medium or longer ranges feels pretty difficult, and especially feels kind of poor because of the recoil on the weapon. Of course, it may be a pretty different experience on PC, but when you land shots, of course, it feels great. I just don't feel like it's as comfortable as aiming down sights in D1. Hipfire is definitely better in general. The hipfire stability is really high versus Destiny 1, but of course, it's easier to miss shots this way, and this is where you'll probably get a definite divergence between the console and PC performance with the weapon, so let us know your experiences. But one of the questions that I think folks kind of had would be, how does Luna's Howl and Not Forgotten stack up versus Last Word? And I think both of them will remain as viable as they've been up until now. The Last Word can get a player to similar time to kill values for a hand cannon, but the reliability of other hand cannons in the game in medium range, especially paired with a shotgun, I don't feel like it's replaced by the Last Word. That's not to say the Last Word is bad though. It's entirely possible to go off with this weapon. Of course, you can pair it with snipers as well pretty nicely. You can have a lot of fun with it, but I really don't see it being the meta. And the rest of the kind of hand cannon meta in itself is going to stay pretty much the same. Not Forgotten, Luna's Howl, Ace of Spades, Duke, whatever it is that you like using, they're all doing what they were doing before, with minimal challenge from any of the newly buffed weapons. Now though, let's speak about an entire archetype that got buffs, and of course that would be the Scout Rifles. So one to talk about would be the Rapid Fire Frame Scout Rifles. So these have seen a buff of 6% base damage, so if you take something like Frostmire's Hex, it now kills with 5 shots very comfortably. Importantly though, you don't need to hit 5 crits, so 3 crits and 2 body shots is going to be enough for a kill, and considering they are rapid fire weapons, of course it is easy to miss a crit. So generally that's making this entire archetype perform a little bit better and be a little bit more reliable in the game right now. A weapon that folks were curious about would be the Mida Multi-Tool. Of course, this fits into the lightweight frame scout rifle class. The class on the whole has seen a base damage increase of 5%, but for Mida Multi-Tool it doesn't affect time to kill inside of PvP, so it doesn't strictly have an advantage compared to the previous Sandbox, although in general Mida is still a pretty good feeling weapon on the whole. Of course there are other weapons in this class though, things like the Manananan. If you remember that from year 1, you get that 5% buff, and of course there is a scout rifle damage buff in PvE of 10%, so on the whole we should be looking at 15% buff on the Manananan or anything else in that lightweight class, and they do feel noticeably improved in PvE content, so definitely don't miss out on that. Another weapon that feels pretty good in PvE would be Polaris Lance though, once again affected by that 10% damage buff, and paired with the exotic bonus it feels pretty strong in the game. And a quick shout out right here, while there hasn't been any direct change to PvP with this update, Polaris Lance is still feeling really good in the Crucible now that it can 3-tap, so on some longer range maps you can really go off with this thing. But of course on the whole, any scout rifle you enjoy using has seen some kind of buff in PvE, so anything you want to use in that scenario will be better than before the update. Now a final archetype that's seen a pretty good change would be the rapid fire frame sniper rifles, and especially for PvP content, this now means that they can 2-tap to the body. So they've seen a base damage increase overall of 8%, and while the rest of the behavior of these snipers inside of PvP doesn't really change, considering they are rapid fire, having this bonus damage is definitely nice. If you can double body at this point and it's worth doing, then why not, I suppose. Generally I feel like it's a good change as Bungie continue to take feedback about sniper rifles in PvP, and of course we've got a few rapid fire snipers, especially for Crucible, Alone as a God, as well as Supremacy are going to be pretty popular, but other sniper rifles, maybe something like Twilight Oath from Forsaken, if you've got decent rolls of them, it might be worth trying them out once again. And that's going to do it really for the bulk of the weapon changes that I want to talk about, guys. This is just the stuff I've been able to look at, but thanks to the patch notes that we've also been breaking down here, we know all of the damage changes, so if there are any weapons you have that fit into these archetypes, then it's going to be a fantastic time to go and try them out. A weapon class that we haven't touched on right here would be the Trace Rifles. So basically Bungie buffed the ammo that you can pick up when you pick up special ammo bricks. This affects all types of content, so whether you're in PvP or PvE, there should be plenty of Trace Rifle ammo, which absolutely is a good thing. I haven't been able to try out Wave Splitter because I'm on Xbox right here, but they did reduce the damage by 19% on medium damage mode and 27% on high damage mode. And that's inside of Crucible content, but Bungie say adjustments were made to keep the damage output the same in PvE activities. Of course, there are also Sandbox changes which affect exotic armor and subclasses in the game, so that's a pretty significant side of this update, but I did want to focus primarily on weapons here. In terms of PvE, everything that's happened, obviously, is really good. I'm especially excited about things like Legend of Acrius, which is absolutely insane now. And then in PvP, we've got a little bit of a mix-up, a few underloved weapons, I'm maybe seeing some improvements, but otherwise the meta doesn't really, shift in any substantial way. As far as weapons go in PvP, the update has primarily improved a few which have been underperforming. So guys, anyway, let us know down below any weapons you've been using since the update dropped. Any thoughts you have on the Acrius buff or any of those nice PvE buffs we've had, top PvP weapons you've been using, or any thoughts you have on the Last Word. Let us know any opinions down in the comment section below, but if you have enjoyed the video, a rating is very much appreciated. If you're new to the channel, be sure to hit subscribe to see a lot more Destiny content. For now though, thanks for watching as always guys. Whatever you get up to, I hope you have an awesome day.